Today, we're going to be turning this grayscale fairy door into the cutest little rustic masterpiece. Think kind of cottagecore, forest vibes, and a sprinkle of woodland wizardry. So grab your colored pencils and your alcohol markers, and let's make this door look like it's been standing in the enchanted woods for hundreds of years. I'm going to be walking you guys through how to color your grayscale images, particularly the fairy doors. And I want to show you how to make them look like weathered painted wood that's been in that forest forever. And I'm going to be showing you some tips and tricks, and also mostly just to color along, but I will kind of give you some guidance along the way. So this is the image that I've chosen to show you guys today. And I'm not going to be doing the flowers in this episode, or sorry, in this video, but I will be doing the door itself and some of the surrounding door frame. As always, don't forget your barrier sheet behind your work. This just ensures that nothing's going to bleed through onto the page and behind here. And I'm using a page protector that's got a few sheets of paper in it, and they are reusable. I just wipe off any excess from the last project that I've done, and they last for a very long time. I haven't had to replace this one yet, and I've been working with it for almost a year. So that is a handy tip for you guys. I also do use a pad of paper to swatch out the alcohol markers that I'm going to be using. And then once I have that swatch, I'm able to kind of test out some of the colored pencils that I'm going to be using when I add in the shading and the highlighting over the wood. So the look that we're going to be going for, let me find my page. I want it to have a really weathered, painted look. I want it to look like it's been, you know, in the forest for hundreds of years. They still love their place, so they're taking care of it, but it is old wood. So you'll see that towards the bottom, I'm adding a little bit extra shading there. I am leaving some of the middle parts a little bit lighter, and I will show you that technique as we get closer. So today I'm going to be using Ohuhu brush tip alcohol markers and some of my colored pencils. I do use three kinds of pencils. I'm using the Color colored pencils, I'm using Amazon Basics colored pencils, and also occasionally I will use a Staedtler colored pencils for some of the details. If I can't find a perfect shade in one of my other pencils, I will use my Staedtler. And I have linked everything in the description below if you are interested in having a look at any of the books that I have. I also have a link there for free coloring pages, and I will make sure that I have a free coloring page available for my Flowers and Fairy Doors book, which we are coloring from today. I've chosen a pink to go with the door today, and I will swatch it out here. This is going to be a very pretty color. Ooh, I like that. So what I also do is I write out what colors I'm using, just in case I need to go back and reference, you know, if somebody asks me what color I've been using. And I really should have gotten a pen handy. There we go. And this is RV 200. And I'm using the Ohuhu brush tips. I find brush tips are a little easier to control in this type of coloring. I do like using a lot of flicking motions, which you will see. And I like the color to be a little bit uneven. And that kind of creates that weathered painted look. So I'm going to start from the bottom, and I'm really lightly going up in flicking motions. And I find the brush tips give you a little bit more control over how much ink you're putting down. And I am trying to follow the wood planks. That's the word I was looking for. And I'll just do one at a time. And where the shading is already existing from the page, I am going over with a little bit more, depositing a little bit more of that ink. And intentionally leaving some spots quite a bit lighter and with white showing through. I'm going to start up here and work my way down. Also be really careful with these, with any alcohol markers actually. They will run, especially if you're using regular paper, if you're printing up a page and just using regular printer paper or using Amazon coloring books, they still have a tendency to bleed. So just get to know your markers a little bit, and that will help you with your coloring. It's a good thing to practice. It's just how much ink you're depositing down. Now for these, I'm not really worried about where I'm leaving the white spots because it is going to be weathered. I want it to have a very irregular appearance. So I'm not really worried about how or where my patterns are going to be for the whiter or lighter areas. It's just very random. But using the flicking motions in that same direction as the wood planks does lend to that kind of a rustic look. If you were to color across the lines, you wouldn't be getting this illusion of uneven wood. And along the sides here, you can add a little bit more to bring out that shadow back there. Okay, so first coat is done. I am going to let this dry for a moment before I continue. So this would be a good time for me to swatch out the colored pencil that I'm going to be using for the shading and the highlighting for this. So I'm thinking I might use a magenta, like a dark purpley pink. I think that would be nice. You can always also use a gray, or this is a darker brown. It's like a purpley brown, so I might actually keep this color aside as well. And you can always use black as an extra shading to really intensify some of the shades. So I will keep those two colored pencils aside. One is the Van Dyke Brown and the other is black, and those are both from the Amazon Basics. The magenta is also Amazon Basics, and I will be using that for the majority of the shading. And for the highlighting, I'm going to stick with my white colored pencil, and you'll see that it really does show up on the pigment, the marker that I put down. It's a nice vibrant color, and the white really shows up very nicely over top. And again, this is Amazon Basics. So I think before I start using my colored pencils, I am going to go over in a few spots and just add in a tiny bit more of the alcohol marker, just in spots. And again, I'm using that flicking motion and keeping the strokes really, really light. I don't want to deposit too much ink down, but I do want to change the color in some spots a tiny, tiny bit. And adding that extra layer of the alcohol marker will give you that effect. And again, I'm keeping it really random and uneven. I don't want it to be a solid color. Oops, it looks like I went over it a little bit there. That's okay. So we'll give that 1 second to dry before I use the alcohol marker or the colored pencils. But I am going to get myself organized. I do have a little container that I put everything in as I'm coloring, so I'm not all over the desk, which I tend to do. Okay, so let's give this a good sharpen. And I just have my pencil sharpener. Where did it go? My goodness. Oh, there it is. I find coloring like this so satisfying. It will change within a matter of moments. It's so great. So now I'm taking this magenta and starting at the bottom. Again, I'm using those flicking motions, really uneven, and I'm just pulling the colored pencil up into the alcohol marker that I've already put down. So essentially, I am following the grayscale from the page. Wherever it's darker, I'm adding a little bit more of the magenta of the colored pencil and going lighter where I want the areas to remain light. So for this plank, for example, I am going to add some extra along the sides, but keeping the really light areas very light. I might add a little bit of the magenta over top, but just using a very, very light hand, and the flicking motions really does help to kind of feather the colored pencil out. And the fun with colored pencils over top of the alcohol marker is that you get that look of colored pencil without the work of colored pencil. I love using colored pencils for my pages, but my poor hands do not love the hours it takes to get the effect that I'm wanting. So I'm really enjoying this technique where I am using the alcohol markers to lay down the base color, add maybe a few little shadows and whatnot, but what the fun for me is coming in and using the colored pencil over top. And it also does change the color a little bit, so you can see the difference between where I put down the alcohol marker here and this really nice dark, it's called Dark Orchid, and then going over it with the magenta colored pencil just makes it look a little bit more pink. It gives it a lot more depth. And you can definitely have a lot of fun adding and layering different colors of colored pencil over top of your alcohol markers to get a color that you wouldn't normally have in your colored, or sorry, in your alcohol markers. So you can create different looks and different textures using these two together. That's looking pretty good. And this one here, you can really see that that one I haven't done yet. And it's really just taking a couple of minutes and not a lot of pressure or using a lot of heavy strokes. That's very light, and it's so I find it's easier and a lot more fun, especially since I am coloring to help with anxiety. So this is my therapy. So I'm going to take, I think I'm going to use the Van Dyke brown and then the white. So keep that one aside. But the Van Dyke brown is where I'm going to go in and I'm going to really add in some more intense shadows. So I will start at the side here, and I'm just going to flick that pencil kind of up along here, and see, again, it is changing the color a tiny, tiny bit. It's this grayish brown color. So you're not taking away from that pink, but you are adding in another shade. So it does kind of give it the illusion that it's very layered and weathered. And for me, I do like starting at the darker areas when I'm adding my shadows. So I will start kind of along the side and then along the top here where the shading is already existing, and kind of pull down some extra shadows along the sides, anywhere underneath. Let's do a little bit around this window. So I want this window to look like it's on top, like it's an added element on top of the door. So I want a tiny shadow underneath it, and I'm not coloring it really. I'm just adding a little bit of that wax down onto over top of the pink that's there. And I will be adding that detail for the window, a little peephole there. So as I get to elements that I want to add shadows to, I will go in and kind of do my thing around it. Let's start over here. Right, and this hinge that's here, I want it to have a shadow underneath. So what I think I am going to do after I'm done with this brown is I'm going to go over very lightly again and add in a few, like a tiny bit of that black underneath, and using the same technique. So really just using that flicking motion, and I'm using flicking motions so it still kind of goes with the grain of the wood. I want the grains of wood to kind of stand out a bit, since it is painted wood. This might need a sharpen. It's always good to have a sharpener handy if you're working with colored pencils, especially. Okay, that's looking very nice. I don't want to change that pink too much, so I'm not adding a lot of this brown. I'm just really just dragging my pencil over top in a couple of areas. And again, that flicking motion really creates some texture. And you can tell that I am going around some of the other elements like leaves, and you can see that I've gone over a little bit with the ink has gone into the flowers there a tiny bit. I'm not worried because I will be going over those using the same technique. I will be using the alcohol markers, and then I will be using the colored pencils over top as well. So I'm not worried about some of the ink running. I do try to be careful, however, but if it does run a bit, that's okay. Just enjoy your process. Really, that's what this is all about. I'm going to add a tiny bit of a shadow here and a little bit more under here. So when I'm adding extra shadows, I do sometimes use this almost like an oval back and forth motion, almost circular, but more oval. And that puts down, and I'm really using a very, very light hand. I'm not using a lot of pressure to do so. But that kind of oval or small circular motions does allow you to kind of layer how much you want to put down without scratching the paper or creating too much of an intense line. So now I think I'm going to do my highlights first and then add in a few more little intense shadows with the black. So here I'm going to use the same idea. I'm going to just add in a few strokes of the white, almost opposite to where I've already put the shadows. So if you think about light and dark and shadows and highlighting, you want them to kind of be opposite to each other. So if you've added a shadow somewhere, say along here, I want to add a highlight nearby or on top of it, or directly beside it, not on top of it, sorry. I think I need to add a little bit more of this magenta here. So I'm just lightly going to kind of take some of that really, really white area, and I'm going to just add a tiny bit of this magenta back over top. I don't want to lose how light that is. I really want it to remain light, but I did want to kind of lighten it up a little bit. And this white colored pencil really shows so nicely on top of these vibrant colors, especially. And makes a huge difference. And again, random. I really want it to be random and look like this fairy has lived here for a long time. And maybe she just recently repainted the door, but because the wood is so old, it kind of seeps into some of the cracks and is uneven kind of. So that's the look I'm going for, really. Okay, maybe I will zoom in a little bit and show you my process for adding the extra shadows with the black. I'm basically doing the exact same thing I did with the brown. And that just intensifies some of the shadows without making it too dark. And I'm glad I did that brown first because it does add that dimension without making it too dark. And then this is just kind of to accentuate some of those shadows without being too dark. And you can also intensify some of the shadowing that you're doing in areas that are a little extra dark, and it makes it look so three-dimensional. I'm hardly putting any down of this colored pencil, but it's making quite an impact. And the bottom of the door here, you know, there's lots of mud, and maybe when it rains, it splashes up a tiny bit. So it does get a little bit more weathered there. And that's why I'm putting a little bit extra of that down at the bottom. I don't want to lose the pink though, so you just be careful a little bit. The other bonus about using colored pencils over top of the alcohol markers is that if you don't like what you've used, or you think you've added too much, you can always take an eraser, and it won't take it away completely, but it will lighten it enough that it removes some of that color pigment, and you can go over it with another color. So that is the shading and highlighting for the door. And I am going to use my smudging tool to really blend in those colors. So I'm just using the the Staedtler. It's called a blending stump. I just call them blenders. And once you've used them a few times, you can use a nail file to kind of shave off some of the colors that's there, so it doesn't transfer onto your image. Let me see, I do have a darker side here. I was doing some purple last night, and you can see that it's kind of embedded into the end of the blender. You just clean that off by using a nail file or a piece of sandpaper, or you can just rub it off onto a piece of paper. See, this one's not too bad because I think I did clean it last night. But that's always a good tip too, if you are using a blender, just to make sure it's clean before you start smudging your colored pencil. If you don't have a blender, you can use things like a Q-tip, a cotton ball, and makeup wipe, or sorry, a makeup pad, not the wet wipes. Or you can use a makeup sponge. You can get a bunch of makeup sponges from the dollar store and kind of have your own stash of those that you use for blending. So there are other ways to blend without having to spend the money. I think these were like $6 at Walmart for a set of 5. So they weren't too bad. And as I'm blending, I am following the grain of the wood, and it just nicely softens those colors all together. This is so pretty and satisfying. It doesn't take any of the alcohol. It doesn't do anything for alcohol marker. Just as a side note, it will only work on colored pencil. Now, seeing some of the parts in the middle, I think I want to change it a tiny bit. So I'm a big fan of, going over things if I'm not 100% happy, or I feel it needs a little bit of something else. I'm going to go in and try a different color of paint and just see if I can add a tiny bit of oomph. So you may find that you're using maybe 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 different kinds of colored pencil just to get it how you want it. And obviously, you do not need to go that intensely. You don't need to go that far with how many you use. You can go ahead and even just use the alcohol markers. Because of the shading that's already there, you really don't need to add the shading and highlighting. This is just part of my process. Yeah, that middle part there needs a little bit light. There we go, that's better. So I will sometimes kind of go between my lights, my darks, the mid-tones that I've picked, like this new pink that I picked. I think it's hot pink. Just to add different variations to the painted door. And I will give it another very light blending. And then I will work on the other elements of the door. We're going to continue with the other elements for the door. Now I'm going to do the hinges and the door handle along with the little peephole in a gray. And then I'm going to add details with the colored pencil as always. And for the door frame around here, I'm going to leave the little roof that's up here. I'm just going to do this kind of wooden door frame, and I chose a brown, cocoa brown it's called. So I will swatch both of those out as well, so I can really pick my colored pencils that I'm going to use over top. I think for the gray I might just stick with the black and white, and this is CG030. That's a nice complementary color to that pink door. Oh, this one's a chisel tip. I was going to use a fine tip, but I have some of my Ohuhu markers are brush tip and fine tip, and the others are brush and chisel. So if you are using a brush tip for some of the finer details, just really go light and use like that very tip of the brush. And I'm just going over some of the ink that bled from the pink, and it will just blend it in nicely. You can hardly see it. I'm going to go over that and that. Little door handle. Okay, I'll let that dry for a second. Actually, I think maybe we should do like a little stained glass there. Maybe use a bright, this is fluorescent yellow, light yellow green. So I'm going to add a little bit of this colored pencil, oops, just while the other stuff is drying. And I'm going to add some light coming through the back of that window. A little bit just in behind this window to make it look like it's glowing from the inside. I will sometimes do little details like this while I'm waiting for the alcohol markers to dry. That's the other tip I have for you guys, is to always just make sure that you are allowing that alcohol marker to dry before you're adding your colored pencil over top. It just makes sure that you're not going to rip through your page or do any damage. And also, it's just a better idea to let it dry. Okay, so that's kind of cute. That kind of did stand out a little bit better. So I think now that these are dry enough, I am going to go in with my black and I'm going to shade kind of along the bottom, just really lightly again, just adding in some shadows where they're already kind of existing, just accentuating them a little bit, and along that bottom part. And I'm really adding a heavier shadow along this side because it is going to be behind the door frame. So the door frame will be casting the shadow onto these hinges and a bit of the door. So even if you wanted to add a little bit more of that shadow along here, you feel free to put your shadows and highlights wherever it feels right. I'm going to add a little bit more under this window here. And under these little panes. And I'm honestly hardly putting anything down, but it does make a tiny difference. Now I'm going to take my white. Let's bring you in a little bit. There we go. And do the same thing, except opposite. I think shadows and highlights are opposite of each other. So your highlights would mostly go at the top of something or wherever the light will be hitting it. And it really makes things kind of come to life and really look three-dimensional when you add your shadowing and highlights. And you don't often need very much. Like that wasn't a lot at all. And look at me going over things all over again. Okay, so that is the door. What I am going to do again is go over with my blending tool just to lightly blend all of those shadows and highlights into the paper. Really, really gently. It just takes some of those harsher lines away. I'm going to start with the E400. Oh, let me swatch that out. Oh, and see, I didn't even use my swatch for the colored pencil. Sometimes I already know which colors are going to work. And for those, I just use black and white. This is E400. And like I said earlier, I'm just going to go around the door frame. And I use the same technique as I did for the door. I do like using small flicking motions or even patting in the ink in some instances. If it's a really small spot, I will just kind of pat in a little bit of ink without saturating it too much. Or do little squiggles to kind of just put a little bit of that ink down, like that. And again, I'm not worried if it is even. I want it to be uneven and have variations in the light of the ink, the lightness and opacity. I am going over these small vines that are here because I will be adding those details in later using my gel pens and acrylic markers. I have a few things that I like to add my details in afterwards. And so I'm not worried about covering some of those little bits up with this marker. You do want to keep the marker moving, and it's called chasing the ink. So you don't want to let it dry and then go back over top of it, especially if you're using the same color or trying to blend two colors together. I can do a tutorial on blending your alcohol markers in another video, but for now, I'm just remember to keep your ink wet. That's another good reason to have one of these page protectors instead of a piece of paper. The paper underneath is going to absorb that extra ink and make it dry faster, while using a page protector keeps it from drying out too fast. So it is very helpful. Let's try, I think this Van Dyke brown that I've been using for the other bit is going to be perfect. It is, look at that. So that is a color that I'm going to use for the highlight or the shading. And I wonder if I should use like a yellow might be nice, or I wonder if there's a light gray. I haven't used gray yet. That's too dark. Okay, maybe that won't work. I may have to play around with some other colors, but that's too dark too. I think I need to do it a yellow. Yellow will definitely show up on that brown. And I'm going to do the same thing. I am going to add shadows where they are existing. So if you look at the page, there's shadows under here, like under where the flowers are, where things kind of overlap. So along here is where the shading is going to happen. In between the cracks here is where I'm going to apply my shading, and along the flowers, I really want them to be on top of that doorway. So I want to make sure I create a shadow underneath it, so it's casting that shadow on the doorway. So I will start down here, and I am going to use mostly, I think for this part, my small tiny circles. And that creates a nice soft shadow. And the bigger you make the shadow, the more far away your image on top looks. So just adding a little bit extra down here makes this flower look like it's really standing out from that doorway. So you can play around with different variations of shades and how dark you make them, the position. So if you are imagining that the sun's over here, then shadows would be more on the bottom right-hand side. Sorry, you can't see that, but I was pointing here. So if your light source is coming from, say, the top left, your shadows are going to be more prominent on the bottom right. So just kind of think about where your light is coming from. These books do give you kind of a leg up, knowing where to add those shadows based on what's already been printed. So it helps kind of with practice as well. And again, I'm not adding a lot. I'm just creating a couple of shadows, adding a little bit of this colored pencil. Now I'm going to highlight with the yellow, and basically following the opposite rule. I don't know if it's a rule, but I call it my opposite rule. So almost opposite to where you've already added in your shading is where you're adding in your highlights. And also think about where the light would be hitting any of the objects. And again, I'm going to take my shading tool, make sure I'm not going to blend in any color that's already there, and really lightly just melt those colors together, smudge those colors together. Just softens them up. So that is how you color a fairy door. I am really happy with how this one turned out. I love the pink, and I love how I, eventually kind of picked out a couple of more colors to layer over top of the pink alcohol marker. And I think it just really brings it to life a little bit. What I will be doing in the next video is showing you how to color the flowers and the greenery all the way around using alcohol markers and colored pencils again. So if you watch any of my videos, 99% of them are using a combination of the alcohol markers and the colored pencils. That's just my process. That's the way I like to color. And I'm so happy to share it with you guys. I can't wait to color these flowers. These ones almost look like they're snapdragon-y type. So I'll have to sit and figure out what colors I'm going to be doing for those flowers. So I can't wait to give you guys a tutorial on those. Thank you so much for joining me today. Please remember to like and subscribe and share with anybody you think would enjoy watching or learning how to color these fairy doors. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.